Good afternoon and welcome to our Weave webinar. We'll begin in just a moment. You should be seeing a Weave welcome screen and we'll get started in just a minute. People are coming into the webinar. Good afternoon. We're so thrilled to have you join us this afternoon for a Weave webinar, Taking the Mystery Out of the Accreditors Site Visit. We have folks joining the webinar now, so we've got a couple of housekeeping things that we'll take care of for the next minute or two, and then we'll get started. My name is Dr. Sherry Popp, and I am the Director of Professional Development here at Weave. We're thrilled to have you join us today. We are recording this session. Following the session, you'll receive an email with a link to the recording as well as a survey that we would love to have you fill out. And I think without wasting any more time, we'll go ahead and get started. It is my pleasure today to introduce you to our speaker, Dr. Josephine Welsh. She's the Associate Vice President of Institutional Effectiveness and Data Analytics at Southern California University of Health Sciences, where she oversees institutional research and reporting, assessment and program review, faculty development, accreditation, and compliance and curriculum management. And if you're not tired after hearing all of that, just hold on to your hats because she's got a great webinar planned for us. Josie is the ALO for the WASC Senior College and University Commission, and she has also served as a team chair for the Peer Corps and a lead evaluator for SAC-COC. So I know that people joining us come from many different regions and also a wide variety of programmatic accreditors. And one of the great things about this webinar is that it is general enough to provide great information for whatever type of accreditation project you're working on. Josie is also the president-elect of the Association for Assessment of Learning in Higher Education, and she's going to talk just a little bit more about that at the end of our webinar. So I am going to stop sharing my screen now and turn it over to you, Dr. Welsh.
Thank you. All right, can everyone see my screen?
We can.
Great, great. Thank you so much for having me. With no further ado, let's talk about the team that will be coming to visit you, the report that you'll be writing, the visit, and then some final pieces of advice from me. I will be stopping periodically for you to use the chat for questions, and Sherry will be managing that. So let's first talk about the team. Who are these people who are coming to your campus for a site visit? They are your peers. They might look scary, but really they're just behind the curtain, just like you. They know what it's like to have to write one of these reports. They, like you, maybe wish that some people will show up at meetings and they wish that they could give free cruises to certain people so they don't show up at some of these meetings. They understand where you are. And just like you, they have jobs during the week. You might think that they just spent the last 2 months thinking about you and thinking about this institution. They are ready. They're ready for the visit. They read your report, but just like you, crazy things could have happened last night. Things might not be going well for them. We're all virtual right now, so who knows who might be trying to bother them under the table at home. And so understand that when you go into this, that their email is blowing up just like yours, just as they're trying to do this visit. Think of them as your attorney, just like if you were trying to present a case to a judge, but you needed someone to present and represent you. That's what the site visiting team is doing. They're not there to get you. They have to write a report. They have people above them at the commission to whom they have to show the extent to which you are fulfilling your mission through the accreditation process. So just like you would talk in your own words, explaining to your attorney why you hold the position that you do, think of that when your site visitors are there. Put things in your own words, tell your story so that when they finish with the visit and you're all done and their work has just started, when they go to write their report, they really understand your institution. Start with the end. Think about that report that they have to write representing you and make it easy for them to write that report by knowing the standards, knowing the criteria. There is a reason you're writing this report. Is it a reaffirmation report? Is it an interim monitoring report? Whatever it is, read the directions carefully. It sounds kind of silly, doesn't it? But sometimes we just start jumping to evidence and telling our stories, and we really haven't gone back and made sure that we understand what we're trying to write to. What they will be doing on their report, they'll be looking at each of these standards they asked you to address, and they will be asking themselves some questions. They'll say, does this institution have a process related to each of these standards? I'll talk about this more in a little bit. Then they'll be writing, and here's how it works. So let's go ahead and use an example. Just about every accreditor will have something, for example, that's asking how the budget process ties to strategic planning, student learning, and funding. So that's probably somewhere in one of the finance or institutional effectiveness standards. So they want to be able to write to the team. They might want to first, they'll write their report. They'll say standard C says, and they'll write about that. Then they'll say, now at this institution, the budget process, I don't know, consists of spring meetings with department chairs between these people. Okay, that's good. So how's it work at your institution? Every spring, this particular template, there's your evidence, this particular template is used, and you'll see that on the budget template, the department chair has to link the request to the strategic plan. All right, well, did you provide the evidence? Be careful. You may have provided the template, but that really wasn't the evidence. That's just evidence you have a template. How do they know you're really using it? So you want to get one of those sample templates. Don't give them all of them. Don't give them a transcript of the meeting you had with these people. That's too much for them to have to read. Remember, think about them. Make it easy. So the evidence might be something like, two completed budget process forms, one from an administrative unit, one from an academic unit. That's completed. That would be good evidence. In the same way, provide examples. So I just provided one for this, but if it's a different area, if it's something like our mission informs our activities, you might not have very specific evidence for that, but you might be able to cite some examples. What I'm trying to say is, notice sometimes I said, this is how you'll write the report. Sometimes I said, this is how they will write the report. That's exactly what I meant. Exactly what you're doing. They're doing a shorter version of that for the commission on your behalf. Now, sometimes, even though they're your peers, you inevitably will have, sometimes you will have a person who, no matter what you do, they just seem to be in a mood, and they're not very agreeable. And there's this one visitor who just seems to be in gotcha mode about everything. Don't worry about it. If you're noticing that, the other person who's noticing that is the chair of the team. That's the chair's job. Some of you are probably chairs. If you're a chair on an accreditation visit, you're there to kind of keep everybody aligned. And the chair will probably go to that person that night and say, hey, you really need to stay within the standards, and don't worry about how your institution, for example, handles this standard. So don't worry about it, just trust the chair. If anything really terrible ever happened where you did have a problem with your accreditor repeatedly, and you tried calling the commission and that didn't help, and you had to tell somebody about this accreditor, you do have people who oversee the accreditors. I doubt that you would ever have to contact them. But the point is, these are your peers. Don't be afraid of them. Is there anything in the chat, Sherry, that anybody's asking about relationships with the team members?
Checking here, and I don't see anything right at this time.
All right, keep this in mind then. At the end, if we have time, you know what I'd like to hear? I'd like to hear any advice that you have maybe that I missed about working with the team. But for now, so we get through this, let's move on to the report that you're going to write. Same thing, when you write the report, start with the end in mind. As the leader, the first thing you want to do is go read your last report. Depending on your accreditor, it may or may not be online, but it should be in your files. Note the positive and the negative, and look for breadcrumbs. Now, they're not called breadcrumbs, but we use that phrase. Here's what a breadcrumb sounds like. University X has an established assessment plan aligned with standard Academic assessment is a robust system of Co-curricular assessment was in a developmental stage at the time of this visit, and the team explained that it has clear plans to continue its current co-curricular assessment, which consists of ability services and intramurals with other units, including service learning and study abroad. And that's all they said. They never cited you on it. That was a breadcrumb. They were saying to the next team, hey, when you get there, make sure that they followed through with this and actually developed those co-curricular assessment plans. Look for those and make sure you tend to them. Don't forget the purpose of your current report and don't stray from it. If it's a monitoring report, for example, they will say very clearly exactly what's expected of you, and no more and no less. Make sure that you've looked at the word count. I've actually seen people not look at that. Don't try something like one team tried, which is change the font and think that the team won't notice. They do this all the time. They will notice. So make sure you read the directions and write to them. Do you understand the possible outcomes of your report? So an example might be, look this up on your accreditor's website, ask your liaison to the agency, what are the possible outcomes of this visit? An example might be, oh, it's a monitoring report. And an example might be, here at the commission, we receive the site visiting team's report, and we will either accept your report, defer decision on your report, or reject the report. And then they'll have the reasons they're doing that. Make sure you understand where things are headed. So then how many people do you need to get this thing really going? It depends where you are. If you're just early and on top of things and have it all together, you might be like 4 years out from a visit, in which case on the Weave resource library, you will see, Sherry can point you to that. There is a webinar on a 4-year plan. If you want an exact 4-year plan, I'm going to assume today that we're more like maybe a year to 3 years out. So if that's the case, I would establish your writing teams. Start at the end. What do you mean your writing teams? Well, I don't know. Do you have do you have a lead for each standard? Do you have a lead for each section? However you want to set that up. And then develop a support team, probably people from IT, marketing, your institutional effectiveness office. For sure, early and often, assemble your website compliance team. I would say this is one of the areas we neglect too often. You want to make this easy on the team. You want them to be able to find things on your website, so get that going early. Then you've got these team leaders, have them do these exact same 3 things. Read the old reports and notice areas of concern and possible outcomes. Then instruct these leads and even support people not to take it all on themselves. There's lots of reasons you don't want to do that. First of all, they won't do a good job. It's too much. And second, you're not involving the whole university in this process. What's going to happen if you dump this on just a few people is that, first of all, you'll miss so much evidence that's out there. I promise you, you will, because most of the time, if an institution is cited or dinged, as we'll say, many times they really shouldn't have been. They had the evidence. They just couldn't tell their story well. They just didn't cite all the evidence they really had. They forgot that they gave a survey and a whole bunch of pieces of evidence to this one criterion could have been answered with that survey. You know why? Because they forgot to ask the people who might have sent out that survey. All right. So what you want to do is say, I'm in charge of an area, and I'll just make one up. I'm in charge of the area that has to do with ensuring faculty excellence. So if I have a particular section of that I'm trying to address, why not go to your faculty center and say, hey, do you have some faculty that have come through here who just are, the students just love them because of their andragogy and style. Why don't you reach out to them and ask them to do these bite-sized pieces? It'll involve them in the process. We're going to stick all this evidence. It doesn't matter. You can do something fancy, like do it with software. That's great. You also could have files on your SharePoint or your team site or something like that, but make sure everybody understands where to put these pieces of evidence they find. So all that's to say, be realistic about getting your evidence and include everybody. When you have meetings with your groups about evidence and about the report, make sure that you have minutes. They don't have to be long, but you want to say who came and what you talked about, because you will be asked, how much was the campus involved in this process? So start now, when you have those meetings, start keeping minutes from those. Establish a communications plan now. Right now, it might just be once a month. Closer to the visit, it might be once a week, where you explain to the entire community, hey, we're up for this reaffirmation. I'd start out early by saying, these people are going to be trying to figure out, we're trying to tell our story, trying to tell how we meet our mission. Then you'd funnel that down to the processes and specific meetings in the future. In sum, avoid just taking a few people and assigning them these really unrealistic, huge parts of the report that they're responsible for. What that would be like is writing a really difficult chore chart for children. And then what happens is they just sort of look at you with starry eyes, and they all come back and ask you what to do. And so you're stuck writing the whole thing yourself anyway. So make sure that you create a team. Another strategy institutions try to use, especially if they find a criterion that seems kind of complicated, is they say, oh man, like this, by the way, this is from HLC. I was in the peer core in HLC. So in HLC, they've got this really cool standard, this criterion under the section about faculty excellence and curriculum. And sometimes people look at this and they go, man, I have no idea how to answer this. I know what I'll do. I'll send out a survey. I'll send out a survey to all of the department chairs. Well, what they didn't realize is those other people to whom you assigned criterion, they're doing that exact same thing. And before long, all your department chairs essentially just received every single question you were expected to answer, and you'll get really poor answers, and they won't be engaged. So in summary, what you want to do is start this first swipe through the evidence with your lead team. Make sure you note, you could be doing this now, like if you're a year and a half or 2 years out, maybe even a year out, you want to flag anything first that's a missing process. It's one thing if you have trouble finding evidence, but you know you have the process, that's a smaller problem. A bigger problem is, you know what, you don't have a student complaint policy, or you don't have a budget process. You have time now, go to somebody who can do something about that and get that started. Next, you want to establish a communications plan with your marketing or your maybe even your communications department. I talked about that already. Make sure that you're communicating with people. Next, what you want to do is just schedule meetings with these leads that personally, I would do them in a flip format. It's pretty easy if you're virtual right now, because it's really hard to get all those leaders together and the meeting will be too long to talk about how it's going. So what you might do is any instructions you have for your team, just record yourself, like on Zoom or something. Record yourself no more than 5 minutes, saying, hey, here's where we are in the process right now. Good job. Here's where we're getting evidence. Here's where we're weak on evidence. And here's what I need you to do about it. That way, just like a flipped classroom, when you get together with your group, they can report out, they can ask questions, and you don't have to spend time on processes. Finally, I can't say it enough, start testing your website. So for example, think of it, again, put yourself on the team. So suppose I'm on the team and I've been assigned the criterion that's about assessment of student learning. So probably one of the first things I'm going to do, maybe well before the visit, maybe as soon as I know that I'm visiting your school, I'll get on your website and I'll type in assessment. And if all that comes up is how nurses assess patients for a particular ailment, we're in trouble, because that means it's really difficult for the team. You're making it hard on them to find the evidence. So I would even tell people that aren't in upper administration. I'd tell anybody after school, hey, can you look at these criteria? And maybe they go org chart. That's always a good one, org chart. And so they type in organizational chart, nothing comes up. Or worse, a 404 comes up. So start thinking like a site visitor. Now, the only thing there is your marketing team might say, you're going to mess up our analytics because our website is designed for marketing. Okay, well, you'll just have to explain to them, maybe you have an internal site, but some of that material should be posted publicly, and maybe your marketing team can just have certain pages disregarded so that it doesn't mess up their viewer metrics. This is the format, more than likely, something like this, no matter the accreditor, that your team, again, think of them, not you, that your site visitors are using when they write. They're saying for each of the criteria, does the institution have a process? Is the process working? And if not, what are they doing about it? Sometimes this last piece could earn you a citation, but sometimes it won't. Sometimes there's a reason that you just started doing something, and you can provide evidence that why you don't have a whole lot of evidence and show that you're doing something about the problem. Each of these should come with evidence. So for any of the standards, this would be the process. I can come back and do another example later if you want, but I want to make sure we get to everything. This might be the policy and the templates that you'd provide as evidence. This is the completed templates to show the process works. This might be, don't just say you're working on it. This might be a new plan that you've rolled out that's in its early stages and you have documentation of it. Again, they're writing like that to the people who are going to check their report. So you should be writing like that when you write the report. Think of your report as going straight to the commission. This is not a triangle where the top is the most important. It's more like a Maslow's hierarchy. What to tackle first? That was a question I was asked. Obviously, federal compliance. You're supposed to have graduation rates on your website. You're supposed to have board pass rates on your website. You need a net price calculator on your website. Get that taken care of, and you shouldn't do it. Anybody can read that and make sure it's done. Anything that has to do with transparency or ethics. So if your handbooks are not there, if your tuition prices are hidden somewhere or fees aren't noted, that's really a problem. So take care of that first. Next, you might have an area where you have the process and the process is working, but it's just not easily accessible. Something like, student complaints often comes here. Yeah, we have a student complaint policy. It's just that if you type in student complaints, you won't find it on the website. It's hidden. It's really hard to find. Or we have a policy for our medical students involving safety. And we have it, but it's kind of hard to get to. It's got to be readily available. Those would be your next fix, because you know you had them, you just have to fix them. This is probably not the time, you know, a year, 2 years out from an accreditation visit is probably not the time at an undergraduate serving institution to change all of your gen ed outcomes. What will happen is, you know, you're trying to be perfect about it. Your team will show up and you'll say, well, we really don't have any assessment going, but look, and you're probably telling the truth. Look at these meetings after meetings that we've had trying to talk about these triple-barreled general education liberal arts outcomes and how in the world we're supposed to measure them. But don't worry, you know, we'll eventually get to measuring them. That is I can't guarantee, but I would say that is nearly a guaranteed citation right there, because you just didn't have it. You didn't have the evidence. You would be better off putting together the evidence that you do have and then showing how, based on how that went and those findings, you're now moving into a time of redoing your general education outcomes. Once you've done that first pass through all the evidence, don't forget to communicate with people. A lot of achievers forget to communicate with other people. So for example, you finished the assessment section draft, send it out to the assessment committee. Maybe you missed some evidence. Find random people, and I really mean that, and ask them to read different sections, and just little sections, and see if they make any sense. As you do that though, make sure you establish a nomenclature for version control. And finally, make sure somebody's keeping up with your Accreditor website, right? Like, they try to make sure that they're communicating changes in how they'll be handling reports. But maybe one of their emails went to your junk email and you don't realize something has changed. So make sure somebody's keeping up with that so you don't get in a situation. I'm going to give you an example. Well, no, I don't want to give an example because I don't want to tell you the accreditor. But there could be a case where an accreditor no longer requires something and you've spent your time working on it only to go through your emails and the website and find out that you actually didn't have to be doing that anymore. So to summarize, what should you tackle first? Federal compliance. Here's another one, faculty credentials. You want to make sure, now I know you're doing it, but is it easy to prove? Usually not. How can you prove that the person who is leading a dissertation in some theory in anthropology is credentialed to be leading that dissertation? The team is going to want to know that that dissertation is not being led by somebody who has a master's in biology and then a terminal degree, an EDD, but in education. But, you know, you guys were trying to save some money. So you thought, well, biology's human, anthropology's that human, there's humans there. And so, yeah, this person's qualified to lead this dissertation. You have to show that that's not happening, that people who are teaching different courses are qualified to teach those courses. So there's lots of ways you can do it. My suggestion would be work with your IT team, but make sure that your faculty, not just your faculty credentials, sure, they want to know how many terminal degrees you have, but what they really want to know is who's teaching these students what courses and with what degrees. So find a way to be able to present that very easily. Again, think of them writing their report, that in a jiffy, they can write that section and say, oh yeah, look, you know, we spot checked, we went to their catalog and we found this course, this course, this course. Then we looked to see who was teaching it, found their credentials, boom, it all matched. Strategic plan is always a fun one. If you just finished with your old strategic plan that sat on a shelf and was never used for the past 5 years, but phew, you got out of that because your accreditation cycle was every 7 years. So now you're having your focus group meetings and trying to develop a new strategic plan. You might get away with writing about that process, how you're working on the new strategic plan. I doubt it. I doubt it. A good peer reviewer is going to say, really? That's all you got? Are plans for your new strategic plan? Wow. Well, since that old one just ended, Do you have a report on the KPIs and how that plan went and why you changed what? Be careful and make sure you're being honest, and that you guys are really using your strategic plan. If that process isn't in place, talk to somebody who is in charge, and get that plan in place. Accreditors are very interested nowadays with how the job placement for your degrees and credentials go. So you want to make sure you have information on that. The specialized accreditors often ask about advisory boards. So I threw that in. It doesn't matter, you're accreditor, somebody's going to want to look at your syllabi. So get those organized, especially if you have a whole lot of adjuncts and you're not really sure where those syllabi lie. Or here's my favorite, you have a syllabus template, and a lot of people are using the template, but you always have those couple of people who still have only a PDF of their syllabus, and that's because they've not changed it in 25 years. That's probably not okay. It probably doesn't have learning outcomes on it. You're probably not in compliance. So get those syllabi in order. I talked about budget process already. Make sure you can show how the budget is decided, how it's inclusive, and how it relates. It is how funds are then allocated according to the strategic plan and student learning. Your accreditation page, is it up to date, or does it say that this particular program of yours is due for a visit in 2017? Your graduation and retention rates by including demographics. If you don't, for not all accreditors don't require that publicly you show it. You show your outcomes by demographics. Some do. Check on that, and then make sure you, even if it's not required, make sure that you have it on your internal page so that your faculty, frankly, can use it, but also so your accreditors can. I talked about the org chart. Nothing like there's people on the org chart and they haven't been there for 10 years. links 404s, don't let it happen. Don't let your handbooks be outdated. And then finally, I put these 3 at the end because you're seeing a whole lot of citations on these. At one point a few years ago, assessment for some accrediting regional accreditors was up to about the 50% rate. So you certainly want to check your assessment. And then we kind of seemed that sort of started to get in order, and we moved to retention and graduation. You want to make sure that you know by lots of different groups that you're looking at it for equity reasons. I'll move to that next, for diversity, equity, inclusion. But do you have learning achievement gaps by demographic? Check on that and make sure you're doing something about it, and you can report out on it. For obvious reasons, diversity, equity, inclusion should be salient throughout your university. Look and see. I'll bet you have it. You might just not be documenting the evidence. And of course, I put as my #1 finance because, to use a hackneyed phrase, we are in unprecedented times, and institutions often are merging and are in trouble financially. And then we've had situations, where accreditors have been in trouble for that reason. And so these accreditors want to make sure that you are financially stable. So make sure that you have very detailed information about finances. That was long. Sherry, what questions do I have?
So you need a breather for a second. So we'll hold for a second and see if some questions pop up. And I'll just say in the break here, it's one of the things that's really hard about these webinars is you can't hear us laughing in the background or see us shaking our heads and agreeing with the things that you're saying, like the surveying people to death or telling people not to change their font size just to try and fool the team readers. So we've certainly, many of us have heard and seen these things. And I'll just point out 2 things that I really gathered from that last chunk. And if other people have some comments or some questions, go ahead and put those in the chat or the Q&A. One that really jumped out at me was recording instructions for your readers to be able to access and use whatever format you deliver this study in. And so one of the things that we've done here at Weave is there's a program called Loom that's free and lets you record less than 3-minute screen captures. And it's a great way to record a little snippet of you saying, okay, click here, open this. This is how you get to this. So those are super handy. And then also just kind of the overall message of that whole section, at least what I heard you saying was distribute the work. share the pain across campus and let everybody be contributors to this process, which is really what the accreditors are looking for. They're looking for a campus-wide effort at this accreditation project. Would you say that's correct?
Absolutely. Absolutely. Yes.
Yeah, good. So I think I'm really excited to hear this next part about the site visit, especially because I know you've had some experiences already with both virtual and on campus. And so a lot of people have had to make this switch to the virtual site visits, and they're kind of, scared about how that's going to go. So we're excited to hear that from you.
Well, let's go. It can be fun. And that's why I'm moving relatively quickly, so that if there's an area, I just want to make sure I cover things for you and that we can return to an area if you have questions. The virtual site visits can really work in your favor. So let's talk about that. You won't hear this enough from me today. Think backwards. Put yourself in the shoes of the site visitor, right? They thought it'd be a really great idea. Most of them aren't paid. So they thought it'd be a really great idea to be a peer reviewer. And on a week that they have 1,000 other meetings, they're also scheduled to be online with you, evaluating your institution. Put yourself in their shoes, and I can't say it enough. Think about what they have to write and make it easy for them to write it. I know that you worked really hard and gathered every last piece of evidence you could find, but they don't want every last piece of evidence that you can find. So help them navigate your report. So about 2 months out, you want to start practicing with people. And so what I would do is start asking people about, which meetings will happen. You don't know every single one, but that there might be an open forum on this particular area. You'll know that they'll want to meet, with the assessment committee, right? People like that. And so start thinking about whom you would like to invite to those meetings. Some of them will be open, but even the open sessions, I would invite people, or you might not have anybody there. And I'm not saying to give them each a script to talk about, but you might want to get together with them and say, okay, so here's what they're trying to understand when they come here. They're trying to understand our process of assessment. They're trying to understand the extent to which it's working. They're trying to understand how we're using all these gazillion reports that we're writing to actually do something with them. So let's talk, guys. What points do we want to make if you were writing the report tonight? Which of our stories do we want to make it to their report tonight? And let's think about who might want to raise their hand during this meeting and talk. Guys, I guarantee you have the information. You have to be in assessment. You have to be a fisher and a broadcaster. You probably have the assessment happening. Go find it and then help the person tell that story. You can pay somebody to do a mock visit. That certainly would go well. But also you might have peer reviewers right there on your campus, or you might have people who can at least go through the criterion and ask questions if you can't afford to do something like that. And when you prepare them, it's not in this sneaky scripted, okay, they'll ask this and then you say that. You don't need that. It's literally more being prepared. Do it in a positive way. That's why you want to involve so many people and say, oh yeah, that really cool signature assignment that you have where they're given a novel situation and they have to do blah, 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 blah. Can you talk about that when we talk about authentic assessment? Could you talk about that if they use that phrase, right? Because how would they know what authentic assessment is? So that sort of thing, where you're preparing people in a positive way. Again, make sure, go ahead and tell your team, hey, this meeting is about shared governance. We got in trouble for this twice before. And so you know what, guys, I know that some of you are new to this institution, but the whole reason that provost has those meetings with your department every other month is that she wanted to make sure that your voices were heard. Oh, really? Yeah. So when you attend this meeting, can one of you mention that? I don't know if they'll believe me, I'm a dean, but could you maybe mention that? Okay. That's not cheating, that's preparing. Make sure that your people understand the outcomes of the visit. Interim reports take additional staff, they take additional time, they take additional funds. So let's all work together to not get citations. Explain to them that we're working together here to show we're not perfect, but here's our mission. Put the mission up and say, we're trying to show that this is what they're doing. Use your technology. So for example, if you're virtual and they're meeting with you on Zoom, why don't you also have a Teams chat going with everybody? Well, not them, right? But with your group. And it's, kind of like Cyrano de Bergerac going on. Now make sure you turn off your notifications, or during the entire call, you'll hear the bleeps happening. But it's time for, the site visitor asks a question, somebody tries to answer, and you happen to understand that area really well, and that wasn't quite what they were looking for. So, you get on Teams, and you say, hey, I think they also wanted to hear about could you talk about that? Or sometimes just two leaders in the room, will talk back and forth and say, I don't think we quite covered that, could you jump in? So yeah, use technology to your favor. Make sure you explain that at these meetings that, trying to take down the administration through this site visit probably won't end well. First of all, it won't end with all of administration being fired, and it probably will require a resource intensive interim report that sort of we're all paying for in time and money. And yeah, now is probably not the time for you to try to use this site visiting team to vet. Sometimes the writing leads talk too much. In fact, sometimes they unintentionally cut off conversation at these meetings. And so every time a question's asked, everybody turns and looks, to the writing lead. So if you're a writing lead, reserve your involvement for times when you feel like you need to clarify something, like that reviewer. Sometimes there is one, like you just sit there and you're so frustrated. You're like, dude, I spent weeks writing that section and you just asked about it. Like, did you really read this report or not? Sometimes it's that, yeah, for sure they read it. They just want to hear it in your own words. Other times it's, I don't know, they fell asleep and maybe they thought they read that section, but they didn't. That's probably time for you very politely, to step in and say, oh yes, the outline for the way we do that is on page 42. And we link some evidence there. Do you want me to write it in a note to reference that and maybe give it to you afterward? That's when your writing lead should talk. In the same manner, as far as your administration, be really careful about your administration during meetings, because the same thing will happen. A question will be asked and if people will get intimidated and they'll just all turn to the administrator to look for the response. And sometimes the administrator will cut off healthy conversation that the accreditors are looking for. They're looking to hear from faculty and staff and students. So if you're an upper administrator, hang back. I mean, do you really have to be at that meeting? And if you do, reserve your comments for areas that have to do with upper level kinds of things, like the fact that you're going to be starting 3 new programs, or that you're going to be working out a partnership with another institution. But leave the details of how things work at the institution to your people, so that they get it, so that they understand that you do practice shared governance. So again, remember what they're trying to do. Can I say this again? They are trying to write a report and you are trying to make it easy on them. So they, on their report, this is what they have. They have to do all these things. They have to verify a process. So make sure you invite committees to the meetings to talk about the process. They have to verify that you have a culture. So if you say that you have a culture of learning and improvement, but nobody can talk about that, that's probably going to be a problem. They have to include examples, so you should use your web page to this. You might want to say, for example, I did this somewhere. There's so much on that assessment criteria, for example, and they're trying to write to their accreditors. They're trying to say assessment of student learning, standard, is happening at the institution. Okay, well, what's that process? Okay, here's all the forms that people have to fill out, the meetings they have to go to. Okay, great. Where's all that stuff kept? Well, it's in Weave. Here's a login to Weave, and and they get in Weave, and they're just lost because they can't, maybe they can't find something. So that probably, just giving them a key isn't a bad idea, but it also might not be the best. What might be better is definitely doing summary reports with your software. Certainly can do that in Weave. And then just putting summaries, on an assessment page on your webpage. Why not have sample program learning outcomes from each of your programs and have some cool thing, where that's why I said, use your IT team, where, they click on a program and a sample PLO comes up, and then an example signature assignment that's used for an assessment comes up. And then the general findings from that come up. Maybe they say the target, I don't know, was 75% of the students would be able to do we found that 75% of students were able to do this. However, they really had trouble citing references properly. So what did we do about that, right? Closing the loop. We created this module that we added to the course as a reference, and we're finding that now the scores are going up, right? If you do that for at least some of your programs on the website, do you know what you've just done? You've written part of their report for them. They can say, transparent on the website are clear examples of student learning, such as the engineering program checking writing through a signature assignment and adding a module on citing references. You've done it. You've given them their examples. They'll love you. So then just how to treat them while they're there. They're so busy. They don't know where they are. They don't know who all of you are. So if you're the ALO or you're the lead, make it easy for them by title. Already have ready for them who's attended meetings. Well, that's easy, of course, virtually, right? You can just get the list. But if it's face-to-face, you maybe want to have a checklist sign-in sheet type thing where you can just rip it off at the end, type it up for the team and give it to them. They usually want to hear from students. So sometimes having the students as aides, having the students take them to their breaks, take them from one meeting to the next, will give them a chance to get some one-on-one time with students without maybe having to have a whole lot of meetings. They need to stay alert. So you want to make sure that you're set. You don't have to do packages, but I've gone places where, they had Tylenol in the room. It was awesome, right? So think about things that they might need during the day. Name tags is a big deal. That way they know who everybody is. They know who you are. Just think of what would help them do nothing but gather evidence for the report, right? They shouldn't have to, I'm going to go so far as to say, when I'm on a visit, I like to come out of the meeting and I like to know that there's a student standing there who's going to go, Dr. Welsh, and then just take me to my next place. I highly recommend that. Again, your time wisely, use tech to your advantage. Anything that you can give them to help them with your technology. Don't make them fumble around your website. Make sure your IT team is available close to every meeting to help them be able to log on to anything they have to log on to. Here's a funny little one, but your site visitors will love it. So you'll have a master schedule, right? Believe it or not, that can feel really overwhelming to a peer reviewer. Taking that schedule and then chunking it into each person's schedule is really appreciated by the site team. And then finally, your site team has to establish a framework, right? Just like when you write an essay, you have to have a topic sentence. Decide what that framework's going to be. Let me give you some examples that I've seen done really well. Maybe you're an institution that always was an undergraduate institution, but now you're starting graduate degrees with a focus on some area of education. You want to establish that from the very beginning, and then you want to reference that. So for example, when you got to the budget section, you might say, we've had many changes in the budget based on this change that we're moving from being solely an undergraduate institution to this structure. See, now you brought it up again. You're making it salient in their minds. It's going to make it to the report. They're going to start their report going, oh, geez, how am I going to start this report? Okay, I know. I'll talk about where the institution is and where they're headed. You know why they're talking about that? Because you've been talking about it the whole time. I had another institution from the time we got there. They kept saying, if I had a dime every time they said it. We are a small institution. We wear many hats. They said it over and over again. But you know what? When I was in a meeting and I was seeing the same people show up, and I was tempted to think, oh, you're hiding something, aren't you? That's why you keep giving me the same people. No, they had already told me. It's that they're a small institution, and so they wear many hats. So of course I'm going to see the same people. I hope that helps you think about anything that's unique about your institution. Say it and say it again in a different way. I'll take questions in a minute. In summary, I thought, if you fell asleep during this webinar and I don't know, you just want to go home learning something, these are my top 6. They are not research-based. They are Josie's thoughts based on her experiences as 6 big mistakes you see people make. If you are cited and you think, we really shouldn't have got it cited, these might be some of the reasons. The last thing I just said, you didn't frame the report according to the unique qualities of your institution. If you take a lot of transfer students, your gen outcomes are going to be all over the place. Did you forget to tell them that? You could have framed their argument if you had remembered to tell them that. You gave them all your processes with little evidence. I honestly can't tell you how many times I see this. And it's frustrating because I wind up having to ask for the evidence. And, you know, sometimes the team's not required to ask you because you didn't provide it the first time. If you look at your report and it's a bunch of blank forms, go back and provide evidence that shows that that process is actually being used. You didn't follow the directions. Sounds crazy, doesn't it? But I don't know, you started writing a big, broad report that was 300 pages, and they had asked you to succinctly address 3 areas of concern in no more than 75 pages. That will be an automatic ding that you could have avoided. Oh, that's sort of the next one, same idea. Could I say it enough? Read the question and then answer the question. Have somebody else read your report that's not even familiar with that area and say, can you tell me if you had to say how I answered that question, did I answer the question? Or you see this a lot. You had all the pieces, right? You provided your goals for your student learning center. You gave us a bunch of data from your student learning center. You told us improvements that you want to make to your student learning center, and none of it lined up. They were just things you told us, and we looked at the evidence. We totally couldn't see how what you were measuring had anything to do with the goals and why the changes you made had anything to do with the findings. Check that and be careful you don't do that. Your accreditors will notice. That's 5. Number 6, it might not seem very profound, but in terms of how often I experience it, it is profound. You forgot that these people are busy people. They're just like you. They don't know the institution as well as you know their institution. And you assumed that they were thinking about you more than they really were thinking about you. And you didn't make it easy for them to find the evidence and really understand your institution. Thank you for having me. I'm going to take questions now, but I would be remiss not to tell you that in the area of assessment and accreditation, AALHE is really proud to announce that at our summer conference, we have wonderful keynote speakers. 2 of them have written a book called Exemplars in Assessment, where they have gone to your accreditors and said, hey, which schools are doing it right? And the accreditors gave them recommendations. You have to be careful. We wanted to say they didn't want to use them. I don't know if they wanted to use the word as exemplars because they didn't want to say they were perfect. But we asked them, or these 2 past presidents of AALHE, Jane Marie Souza and Tara Rose, asked them, wrote a book about it. They are donating the proceeds to AALHE. I think the conference registration, I think is like $130 for members. And the book is probably what, 40 or $50. And you get the book with it, and they will be speaking about it. We're also having a careers in assessment panel. And we're also having a conversation with accreditors panel where you can ask the accreditors questions. So of course I would be remiss not to invite you to it. Sherry, I think we have some time for comments, questions. And if we don't have comments and questions, I'm really interested in hearing you in the chat, or if Sherry, wants to share what you're writing, maybe something I missed, maybe some advice about the team, about the report, or about the visit that is a nugget you'd like to share.
Wonderful. Thanks, Josie. We do actually have a couple of questions. So I'm going to steal the screen share from you here in just a second so that we can, I've put them into a slide here so that you can see them as well as speak to them. So the first one is, and you kind of talked about this just a little bit, you said something about running some practice meetings, but this question was, have you ever run an in-house site visit, kind of like as an audit process?
Okay, so I just need a clarification. So are you talking about, for example, when financial aid is being audited and you want me to address that? Or are you saying more doing a type of mock visit that's like an audit process? I think it's the latter.
That's what I would guess. And maybe there's some clarification.
Oh, yes. Oh, yes, absolutely. Yes. And actually, I've done a good job at them and I've done a poor job at them. So I'll tell you what I did a poor job. I did a poor job when I spent too much time quizzing the people. Instead, I think what's better than a quiz that sometimes just scares them all off is to go in and use this format. Give an example of a question, see what happens, stop. If it doesn't go well, stop and explain how they might have been able to address that question and go through that sort of format. The other thing that I can't say enough is, you do plant people. That's not cheating. You're planting people there because they have really cool stories to tell. And you say to them, I remember this guy, this is a true story. I had gone to our CIS department at one of the schools where I worked. And I said, hey, the way you guys do this assessment is amazing. And remember how you guys changed this because of that? Like he had forgotten, right? And he goes, and they don't like wake up and write in their assessment diaries. And he's like, oh yeah, we did. I go, yeah, well, you know what? The accreditors would really want to hear about this. Let's pretend that his name is Dr. Jones. The AVP was sitting in that meeting and she told me that when they asked for examples and he raised his hand, she wrote to the provost and she said, is that Dr. Jones speaking? I've never heard his voice. So like it could get hilarious, right? But I had planted that whole thing. So yes, I've done a mock visit, yes, and they work well, but also don't forget to plant people. If you're in the midst of reaffirmation, how do you get core leadership team to be more involved and understanding the tackling of the key areas first? Wow. That's hard for me to imagine. But the core leadership team, probably a little bit of fear, explaining to them, if you can get some stats, I can give you some, on what the citations are in certain areas. Or sometimes people like that love consultants, right? Like a consultant is somebody who's not from your institution. So maybe you can get a friend, to come and serve as a consultant and just say, hey, just here to help make sure you're on track, and have them say everything already, if they won't hear it from you. But core leadership usually cares about monitoring reports and about not looking good in the eye of the public. And so, I might say, hey, there are some areas here. I can pretty much guarantee you on these areas, we're going to be cited. And then that's going to cost us, interim reports are like in the thousands of dollars, to be able to create. So, I might do that. You tried the positive first, right? You told them why we should care about this. It's an interesting question. I've not been asked that before. Let me think about that more. What else?
Yeah, and I think to the extent possible, getting those folks to the regional accreditors
Yes.
conferences so that they can see and actually hear from the accreditors themselves about what's important and what the areas of, where people usually get dinged. I was just at HLC last week and they gave a whole session about here are the top 3 areas that campuses are getting citations on right now.
That's a really good example. I'm going to talk back to Sherry. Sherry, what did they say?
What did the HLC say? So
The 3.
They said faculty credentialing, although that one they're seeing a downward trend in citations. So people are getting better at credentialing. Of course, assessment was at the top and then finances. So
finances, right. So here's the thing, you guys, the other thing they might not realize, I don't know what accreditor you're from, whoever asked this question, but depending on the accreditor, the information is public. People are getting put on notice, like sanctioned for each of the, sanctioned. And that has to be on your website. If it's a specialized accreditor, it has to be as well. If you're on probation or something, they don't want that on the website. So yeah, if you can, I love that. They might not listen to you, but attending something that just says, are you on track with accreditation, right? And let them learn that they're not.
Right. So we are up against the hour here.
Yes.
And there were a couple of other questions in the chat. I know that Josie will make note of those. And she provided her email address in the earlier slides, and feel free to reach out to her. We've got a couple of quick housekeeping and things to take care of. I just would be remiss if I didn't mention Weave Academy. We have courses starting next week. We have courses, some new offerings coming, a Gen Ed workshop, and then a brand new course. Look for an announcement soon that I'm super excited about around the idea of learning improvement. And so if there's anything that you'd like to know about Weave Academy, reach out to me, take a look at our website, weaveeducation.com. And click on Weave Academy, and there's more information there. We will be following up as you close the webinar. You'll receive a survey, and we love to have your feedback. We assess too, and we're planning now for future webinar events and future Weave Academy offerings. And that information that you give us just helps us plan for what's needed in the assessment community. So also visit AALHE's webpage. There's a wealth of information there. And so you can find some help there, and you can find other people to connect with too. That's the great thing about AALHE and the listserv. So we want to say a huge thank you to Dr. Josephine Welsh for joining us today and providing just some fabulous information for folks who are approaching accreditation site visits. And those of you who were in the webinar, you'll get an email from us with a recording of this webinar in just a couple of days once it processes. So,
Sherry, I think while you were going over that, I think I answered all the questions in the chat. So thank you.
Wonderful. Thanks so much for that. It was a pleasure to have you with us today. And it was great to see all of you who were here in the webinar. And we will hopefully see you soon for another Weave webinar.
Thanks, everyone.